Mic check. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Welcome to this episode of The Joy of Hobbying. My name is Zach, and on today's episode, we are going to work on a Black Series scale. This is from Watto Scrapyard. Pedro Pascal unmasked head. This is by our friends over at Watto Scrapyard. And on this sculpt, you can see there's a few nubs that I have not taken off. I think the last episode we spent a lot of time on cleanup of the print and not as much time painting as I would have liked. So we're going to forego some of this cleanup, and we can always touch this up later. But let's talk about the paints that we're going to use today. So for the hair, I have a black paint here. This is just Thin Down Black 2.0. It's a very matte paint, so we're going to dry brush it with some chipping brown. This is going to be the recipe for most of the facial hair and the hair. For the skin, we have we're going Citadel, so we have Bugman's Glow is going to be our first color. Then we're going to go in with Reikland Flesh Shade, which is a really nice shade. I've used it quite a bit. And then last we have Kislev Flesh, which is again by Citadel. And with those three colors, I think we can achieve a pretty good flesh tone for the whites of the eye. We're going to go with Antique Parchment. I've mentioned it a few times. I really like this color for whites. And I also have some various different primers here that are airbrush primers that resemble some bit of flesh. So we have those if we need them. I also have some Burnt Umber by Apple Barrel. I use Apple Barrel quite a bit for mixing and for washes. And then we have Vallejo Mecha Matte Varnish. You can see I've used this quite a bit. And Vallejo Mecha Gloss. So quite a few paints today. For brushes, I'm going to be using several larger round brushes. These are just cheap folk art brushes. I mentioned on the last show I don't take care of my brushes, so I use them for a few weeks, a month or two, and then I junk them when they become unusable. We also have a very fine point brush here again by Folk Art, and we have a few different brushes and some clean waters. So let's let's get started. So this head sculpt was commissioned by Watto Scrapyard. You can see it is a pretty good likeness of Pedro Pascal, the artist that he used. Is one that did not want any credit for his name, so I can't give a shout out to the artist, but it's pretty decent. I primed it in white already, so it is a matte white primer. And if I was, Dean says get to it already. If I was to prime this again, if I was going to redo this, I'd probably use Tamiya white primer. It's a little finer, so let's, I guess we'll get the painting since Dean is cracking the whip on me. So let's start with Bugman's Glow. Now, Bugman's Glow, this is a technique that I've used on miniatures for quite a while, and it works really well for Black Series scale. I would say there's certain methods that you can get away with in different scales. I would say 6-inch scale is probably the last size of scale that you can get away with this method with. I would not use this on 6 scale. It just doesn't really look that right to me on 6 scale. But for Black Series scale, it works quite all right. So we're going to be a little heavy-handed here, and we're going to start covering all the flesh here. And I'm not really worried about the hair just yet, or the eyes. We're going to cover up pretty much everything. And with this paint, we did thin it with water, just regular, tap water. And you want to always, if given, if you need to, you always want to cover this up with multiple thin coats as opposed to one thick coat. If you're going one thick coat, you're going to get brush strokes, and it's just not going to look that good. So you want to try to use as few coats as possible, but at the same time you want them to be thin coats. So 1 or 2, maybe even 3 thin coats is a lot better than one super thick coat. So let's get that painted on there. I think we have a few spots we missed in the eyes. You want to make sure you're getting all these crevices because any white showing through is not going to work right with the next paint that we use. Now, I've used other flesh tones on our YouTube channel in the past, and I mean, they work all right. But for Black Series scale, I really like this this paint combination. So that's our first coat there. And you can see it's quite dark, but that's going to serve as the base layer. The paints that we're going to add on top of this are slightly transparent, so some of that will still show through. And let's see if we missed any spots. There's one spot on the ear that we missed. Missed some spots in the nose. And while this color is drying, I think it might be a good use of our time to start framing in some of the hair on the top of the head. So let's go ahead and start doing that. So let's clean our brush, and we'll stay with this this wide brush here. Okay, so let's go ahead and start tackling this hair. And the really nice thing about this black paint is it has a really solid coverage. It's a really weird paint to work with. If you worked with I've worked with a few different black paints, and the coverage that you get from just a little bit of paint. This is like, 3 parts water to 1 part paint, this ratio here, and it's just ridiculously dense in terms of the pigment, and so you get really good coverage out of it. And this is Stuart Simple's Black 2.0. It is very matte, like I mentioned. It's certainly not a paint that I would use on its own and leave the hair this color, but it's when you use it with other paints, or you seal it with, it's weird because you can seal this paint with matte paint finish, like Vallejo matte, Mecha matte that we're going to use later. And it's so matte that even using the Mecha matte, which is a super matte finish, actually glossens it up. It's really quite strange. So let me take it out of frame here just to focus on the tip of the on the hair over here. Making sure to get in behind the ear. Get that hair there. And like I said, we're going to add some stuff to this, so this is not going to be our final hair color. Just getting the sideburns here off frame, just so I don't have to do too many touch-ups later. I think for these sideburns I am going to switch to a smaller brush. So for this area here, I'm just having a little bit of difficulty getting this larger brush into those areas. I think in a little bit of time, I think like in an hour or so, our English correspondents are going to do their episode this week. They record every other Thursday. And I think they have quite the exciting episode because they're all out watching Rise of Skywalker right now, so that's pretty cool. And let's line up this hair on the top of the head. We got Noble Young in the chat. Noble, it's always good to see you, buddy. Okay, so that looks decent. And we're not going to touch the facial hair just yet. I want to work on that in a little bit. But there is a very small amount of touch-ups I want to do on the flesh paint, and then we'll get into washing that, giving it a wash. So let's clean up some of the black here that may have been overpainted. And like I mentioned, I've been using this paint method for quite a while, and it's really pretty simple. Paints are pretty cheap, and it's just not that hard to do. I do want to make this video series a regular thing on the YouTube channel, and I think the next painting session that I'm going to do, whenever I have time to do it, is the Darth Talon. I know Damien and Rainer have their Darth Talon heads, and so that might be like a two-part thing where we prep the print, which I know is not that exciting, but it does need to be done. And then the second part being painting parts of it. I think my wife is going to do the final paint on that head. And yeah, I think that's something I want to do. My wife is super awesome. She's going to get me the HAL 9000, which is by Mobius, a 1-to-1 scale kit. And I really want to do a Joy of Hobbying, building and painting that. I don't think it's going to be that crazy of a build. There's one part that's really tedious. Hal has a speaker grill, and there's like 100 little holes that you have to drill out, both in both directions, because you have to clean out the excess, and that does look a little tedious. So I'm not sure if I'm going to go that deep into the build. I do want to, but it just depends on how much time I have. But I think that could be it could be a fun Joy of Hobbying if I do some prep work beforehand. That way I'm not doing all the drilling live. I think that would get kind of boring. So Dean says, he's not that brown, you're a racist. Well, unfortunately with this method, you do got to make it more brown than this. This is actually just the first step. And you can see how really nice the detail is on these sculpts. I know my camera's not the best, but they do look quite nice. You got really nice pupils in there, and yeah, I know my camera sucks, but maybe that can be something we can upgrade in 2020. So this looks pretty dry. It does look pretty dry. So let's start adding some wash. So let's see. Let's clean off our brush. Now with this wash, you do want to be a little heavy-handed, because this is going to really set the foundation for the rest of the paint job. It's going to kind of indicate where areas where you need to add more paint and areas where you can add less paint. So this is Reichland Flesh Shade by Citadel, and we're going to start painting this in. being, again, a little heavy-handed here. You don't want to just put too much on there, but you do want to put enough that you can make out some prominent features. And we are going to cover up a lot of this color with other colors, but this is to help you pick out things like the pupils and the wrinkles in the sculpt, things like the nose, the inner brows, the mouth, the underside of the chin, the details in the ear, which you want to preserve. And if you find that you put a little bit too much, we can do the technique from the last episode where we can use the capillary action of the brush to pull some of this wash out. And you can see it starting to look pretty good. So let's put that back in frame. And we're going to add a little bit more to the eyes. And this does take just a minute to dry, so we can maybe work a little bit on the hair while this is drying. But this is where we're at right now. And through a series of keys of flash and other colors, it'll slowly start to resemble something a little bit more in line with the actor's true skin color. So while that is drying, I think I'm going to start with this apple barrel burnt umber. And we need to start working on the hair because the hair is super matte black right now. And this paint's only been drying for like probably 5 minutes, but they say it hits its full matteness in 24 hours. So if we left it like this, it would be a little bit darker tomorrow. I think part of that is maybe a little bit of a marketing thing, but it does get slightly darker over time. I wouldn't say it's like staggeringly darker. And I think a lot of that might be like a placebo effect. So let's start dry brushing in some, we have a rounded or a flat brush here. And we're going to start dry brushing in against the grain some color here. And if we get too heavy-handed, we can always undo that later. I think I might have been a little heavy in that first pass. And this is going to start adding some dimension to the hair. Like I mentioned, we're using a very matte paint, so a lot of that dimension is gone right now. And essentially you want to put some paint on the brush and then dry it off on a dry surface, hence the phrase dry brush. Then you want to start coming in and basically just brushing it across the surface, picking up all the highest points of the hair. And that's a very easy thing to do to add some dimension to big projects, to small projects. You can use this on like Black Series guns. I think it works pretty well there. And yeah, this is a very fast paint method. I'm used to speed painting from Warhammer. So this is like, speed painting is basically like the fastest way to get something playable and decent on the table. And so I never claimed to be a good painter, but I think I am a very fast painter. But let's continue on. Okay, so that's coming along. We're adding, you can see the brown in the hair there. And we could bring it up another shade and do the chipping brown, which is something we can consider towards the end. But I do like the way that this is looking, and the shade is starting to dry on the other part of the head. And we just had our award show this Tuesday, and I think it went pretty good. I think with anything like this, you have things that were really good and some things that you want to change. I think for sure one thing I do want to change for next year is I do want to not use the same adhesive for the letters. I think that was quite awkward. It was just a lot stronger than I thought it would be. So we need to test that out in advance next year. Um, I think it would be nice to have someone remotely operating the camera at a different location. That way they can switch camera views. And also, I think when we went to the wide angle of this table, I didn't anticipate that the video feed would move to the right and block off pretty much my entire side of the table. Definitely something I did not consider. Um, but you know, you live, you learn, and we learned. So there we are. There, you can see we're starting to dry up some of this wash. A little on the chin there that we gotta take off. So we're gonna let this dry for a few minutes, and we'll check the time. It's 3:05, so we got like 25-ish more minutes, I think, before the other guys will probably want me to get off. Probably about 3:30, 3:45. The Only Fools in Collecting team is yeah, they're gonna record soon. Pete actually 15 minutes ago just left the theater for The Rise of Skywalker. So that's 2:51 our time. That's like 9 o'clock their time. So we saw it pretty early. And Dean's asking, when are you guys seeing it? Probably tomorrow. It's weird. I've never not been excited to see a Star Wars movie for the first time. Um, but just really not excited for this movie. I don't know why. I've read some, or not read, but I've watched some film reviews on YouTube of people that I really respect as film reviewers. And with those reviewers in particular, I feel like I align quite well with a lot of their ideas and views of film. And they did not have that many good things to say about it. So I'm gonna go in there expecting for this movie not to be good, and if it's surprisingly decent, I think that'll be a win. One thing on this sculpt, I know if you have the Mandalorian, the other sculpt that I painted the other day did not fit that well on the neck post. So I want to get with Sean maybe to see if we can print a neck for this, that's its own thing. Or potentially, if you get two Mandalorians, you can modify the neck to accept this head a little bit better. But this is almost all the way dry. And you can see the eyes look, you're starting to get that wash in the eyes, and it's kind of going to allow you to pick out some detail later. The next paint that we're going to do here in a minute is Kislev Flash, and this usually takes a few coats for it to start looking decent. I find with the first coat it kind of looks like Deadpool, but as you add more coats and then add a little bit more wash and a few more coats of this, it ends up building up into something really nice. And then when you add the matte paint, the coating from Mecha, I think it looks pretty good. It's not the best thing ever, but it does look pretty good. I think we're dry enough to start doing some of this. Now with this paint, we do have some darker areas in the sculpt, and so we do want to try to maintain those. And like I said, we're going to add more wash, so if you accidentally cover them up, it's not the end of the world, but you don't want to just paint this all on the entire sculpt like we did the Bugman's Glow. You do want to kind of stay to the high points. Let's add some water to this paint. And this is, again, Kislev Flash by Citadel. It's a fairly transparent paint, but I do quite like it. So I'm wondering if this brush might be a little too big, but we'll start anyways. I can see there's some facial hair. I need to reference the 3D file that Sean has and see what is exactly supposed to be what. So we're going to start with the nose. That's a good place to start because it's the most proud feature of the sculpt from the orientation that we're painting it from. It sticks out closest to us, so we're going to start there. And this paint, like I said, it is very very opaque, or very transparent rather, so if it doesn't cover right away, that's intentional design of this paint. And we're going to work this paint up in several layers, combined with washes to get to our final color. So we're going to come here to the cheek, and we're going to kind of avoid some of these eyes. We're going to come to the top of the brow, and it's a pretty easy painting method. And this paint's also, when we put a wash on top of this paint, it's going to allow us to better pick out things like the eyebrows and things like the facial hair. So let's add a little bit more to the brush, and we will continue. And one thing, just in case you're just tuning in, I would not use this method with 6 scale. I think Black Series scale is about where you want that to stop. The effects just don't really... I think with these smaller scales, like if you paint a miniature that's like 35 millimeter scale, which is like an inch and a half, I think your eyes can kind of like fill in some details if you're, like the pupil or whatever. But if you're doing something like this on a large sculpt, I think it's just your eye is more attuned to finding the small things that aren't 100% natural, and it just doesn't really work. So we're going to continue on here, and we can always touch up this black as we need to. And this paint does look pretty bad at first. But we're going to keep working it, and we'll get to something that we like. So let me get close up here and touch up this ear. And again, with the ear, you want to make sure that you preserve that dark spot from the wash. Looks like we got like 4 people watching, so that's pretty cool. Okay, so this is what the sculpt looks like right now. So it does not look super great. We're keeping the dark area here for the for some of the darkest points of this sculpt, and we're going to start adding in a second wash. And our second coat, rather. We're going to use some more water and a little bit more paint. And pretty much the rest of this is just mixing paint and wash until you get the right color that you want. And then of course we got to touch up the facial hair, which I need to really reference. That's kind of like one of my weak points is facial hair. I'm not that good at painting it, but we'll see what we can do today. I'm going to cover this up. We'll do a quick wash and we'll see what we got. Okay, so let's let this dry for a second. I think I did go a little heavy on some parts, but we can always, like I said, add more wash. And I'm also trying to pick out which parts of this sculpt are facial hair and which parts are not supposed to be facial hair. So this is what we got so far. Not the greatest thing ever, not the worst thing ever. But I do see some spots that I want to touch up, like the back of the ear here. Looks like I had a little bit of a bristle come on the sculpt, so we're gonna touch that up there. Okay, so let's let this dry for a second. Mandalorian show's going pretty good. We're just finished the 7th episode last night. And some people were saying it's supposed to be a lead up to Rise of Skywalker, but I don't. Dean says, when are you seeing the Rise of Skywalker? I am seeing it, Dean. I want to see it tomorrow, but I think it just depends on when Victoria can see it. I'm hoping to be tomorrow, but could be Sunday at the latest. It's not, I feel like normally when I go see a new Star Wars film, I'll watch it twice, the opening weekend. And I feel like I'd rather just plan around only seeing it once because of some of the reviews that I've seen. Um, so I don't know. I think I'm just going to see it once, whether it be Friday or Sunday. Let's go back to the wash. And we will do this on the sculpts. Dean, let me know when you're seeing it. I'm curious to see when you're going to go. Now we're going to go back with the Reichland flesh shade. We're going to cover the sculpt. And that'll leave us with some more shading in some of these areas. And then we're going to pull some of this off because this is a little bit too much, but this is going to start to give us some of that warmth back in the flesh tone. Because Pedro Pascal is not that pale. He's saying it. Let's see. We are pop culture icons. You need to get on it ASAP. Yeah, that is true. It just depends on a few things. But yeah, I do plan to see it this weekend. Dean says he's seeing it tomorrow at 10 a.m. So I think if I see it, it should be. I think we were going to shoot for tomorrow afternoon, I think, is when Victoria can get off work. So we're working this wash. We're kind of keeping it moving as it's drying. And this will allow us to tint the flesh just a little bit because it was quite pasty. So let's see what we're working with now. I'm wondering, I know, Dean, we got to do a spoiler discussion, but I think you're not working. You work on Sundays, so we got to figure out if we do have a spoiler discussion when it's going to be. Now, I'm going to start coming in with a smaller brush, and we're going to put some more Kislev flesh. We're going to be very particular about where we put it this time. So we're going to get a small amount on this brush, and we'll start coming back in and working on some of these areas here. Again, we'll start with the nose because it's a very proud part of the face. Coming into the forehead, we're going to start cleaning up some of this wash. And with this layer here, we're going to really be cognizant of where we're putting the, like the top of the cheeks here. That's a good spot to put some of this paint. I think this is Jason, but Jason says if you plan to have an audience, you want to talk about the most current stuff. you do have to make a priority to get out and get it under your belts, or else we're all sitting here like admin says we can't talk about it. Well, even if I see the movie on Sunday, that doesn't mean that Ox is going to have discussion on it. Or I'm sorry, even if I see the movie tomorrow, I think our official stance on discussion of the movie, since it is such a big film, is to follow the Disney embargo, which means, which is what a lot of groups are doing, is basically whenever Disney social media starts posting certain characters or plots, then we're allowed to talk about it. So I think that's how we're going to handle it, like we did for The Mandalorian, and I think that was an easy thing to do that cleared up a lot of confusion. I think a lot of people agreed with that. That's a good way to do it. So, but we will have some discussion on it in some form soon. I think this week is just with Christmas and everything. I know Dean works Sunday, so if he does Sunday, then you might have to do the spoiler talk on a Saturday, something like that. So we will definitely figure something out for you guys. Let's add some more Kislev flesh. Unrelated to toys, I feel like Jurassic Park, Jurassic World rather, Evolution. That game is just, I'm so tempted to buy that $20 DLC. I usually avoid DLC as much as I can, but I think they just put so much into that game from that DLC that I really think I'm gonna make the $20 purchase. It's really quite amazing what they've made that game. It almost reminds me, like Dean always talks about how Black Series, or not Black Series, Battlefront was not a well-received game, and they added so much to it that it ended up being really popular. And I'm just comparing skin tones here from the one I did the other day. I think I want to bring this one up a little darker. So let's just finish our highlights and then we'll make it a little bit darker. This is where we're at right now. Let's see, Dean says you work Sunday 7 to 12. We can do it before, potentially. Sunday's my only day off right now, so Sunday usually I promise Victoria that's the family day, so we'll have to see about that. Okay, let's go back with a little bit of a wash. Yeah, it's just a weird time for Star Wars for me. I feel like I'm excited to see the film, but I'm also not that excited to see the film. I think a lot of people feel like that after The Last Jedi. Remember in The Last Jedi, I just couldn't believe so many of the things of that film. Some of the choices, some of the characters, some of the plot points, some of the returning. I just was really not a fan of that film. So I'm scared to see this movie tomorrow because I don't know. I mean, obviously, I'm glad we have The Mandalorian because that is, if the movie's not good, we always have the episode next week, which I think could be really fantastic season finale. Hopefully, it's just a. Hopefully, they give us a full hour. That's also a thing. But yeah, I guess we'll have to see, wait and see. But I'm not even sure when that episode comes out. I think it comes out Friday, but that seems like a long time between episodes. So I guess we'll have to see what the mouse says. Okay, so I am going to let this wash dry for a second, and let's see, it's been live for about 40 minutes, so we're slowly coming up on that time. So let me see if I can pick out some of these eyes. So we're using antique parchment for the eyes. And I'm still trying to figure out where this facial hair is on this guy. I know there is facial hair, but it's a matter of the where. So we'll put some antique parchment down. And I really suck at painting eyes, so just like with the Yoda video, I'm probably going to pull it off screen while I do that. Just trying to nip any stray hairs on the brush. But these eyes are super tiny in the sculpt. Let's see if we can... Nope, we're not in frame. Okay, so that is one eye with some paint. Not happy with the way the other eye turned out. So let's try to clean that up and start again. Now I'm doing this off screen because these fucking eyes are tiny as hell. Okay, not... Still happy with one eye, but I'm trying to touch up the second one. So let me get some of this flesh color. Looks like one of our live viewers dropped out. Sorry, this is the boring part where I take the model off screen because I have really bad at painting eyes. Okay, so let's just start all over with that eye. The nice thing about Apple Barrel is the paint, when you seal it, it's really good, but if you make a mistake and you haven't sealed it, it's so thin you could just wash it off and give it another go. And I think the one thing with this scale that a lot of people fail to realize is you can really get away with a less is more approach on these eyes. I see so many people trying to do like basically like a real eye in 12th scale, and it's not really, I mean, it probably is possible if you're like a stupid good painter, but I think for the average person it's just easier to give an indication of, you know, the different parts of the eye than to actually paint out every little part of the eye. And again, that's why I'm a very average painter. I don't claim to be an expert by any means. Let me add some wash here. One thing I do after I paint the eyes is I like to add some wash to kind of cover up any minor mistakes, and it also helps me frame the eyes. And it also makes them look a little bit more natural, because I say this a few times, but the human eye is is white, but it's not like a perfect white. Most of our eyes are, all of our eyes are a little off white, so adding a little bit of wash, it's a tip I got from my wife. It just makes the eyes look more realistic, because no one has stark white eyes, unless you're Storm from X-Men. Maybe you have those eyes, but most of us don't, so put a little bit more paint here. I'm just trying to get these eyes done, and I think that'll be, let's get this in frame. I think that'll be, oh shit, damn it. Okay, so that's the good thing about Apple Barrel. When you make a mistake like I just made, I think you can kind of pull it up with a clean brush. And doing this wash here, it really starts to bring out some of the line frame here. Starts to bring out the eyebrows also. So that'll make those easier to paint later. And these eyes are so small, I'm not really painting them. I'm pretty much just like dotting the paint on. So when you're doing this at home, just know that you're not really giving it a brush stroke. You're just kind of like putting the paint and then just pushing it on. And let's just add a little bit of wash here. I want to try to pick out this facial hair detail because I am quite confused with where it is, and I don't want to stop the broadcast to pull up the render. So I imagine it's something like that. I'm also going to add the wash back in the eyebrow. I think we're going to probably call it a day here soon, because I know the English guys are going to want to hop on and talk about the things that they've seen today, since they have the show early. And all this is purely speculation because, Pedro Pascal is the Mandalorian, but, could be like a David Prowse type thing, where the actor that plays the Mandalorian when he's unmasked is a totally different person. So this is just kind of a fun thought experiment that Sean had, and I do like that, what we got so far. So let me look up, actually I will try to pull up the render real quick. And I know Sean is working on blurgs right now, which is really cool. Because who doesn't like blurgs? Okay, so for this sculpt, it looks like there's a mustache and a beard. But I don't really see them, so I'm going to... I don't know if I want to do this on camera, but I do kind of see the beard. And we can always do this another time, or I can finish it outside of the video. But let me hop off, because I think the English guys, they usually start about 3:30, so they should be starting any minute now. But if you like this show, check out our friends at Only Fools and Collecting. They're going to start recording live shortly wherever it is that you're seeing this. They upload on Sundays after they record, so in a few days' time, if you're an audio person, you can hear the audio recording of their show. It's a good time. And as English collectors, they do have a very interesting perspective on what it is to be a 6-scale collector. And I appreciate you tuning in. I'm Zach, and we will catch you on the next Joy of Hobbying and on the next Collecting Weekly episode. Have a good one.